All right, John, so the last final thing that I want to tell you today before I stop is the other two measures of dispersion. So we talked about range and we talked about interquartile range, and you already knew both of those. So we're going to talk about two new things that you haven't heard about before. So range, interquartile range. Now we're going to talk about population standard deviation and sample standard deviation. Now, this is really just, an Algebra 2 trig course. It's not a statistics course, so you're not really going to go really in-depth into standard deviation. When I took standard deviation in college, we had to learn how to do it by hand. Luckily for you, it's in your calculator, and you don't have to figure that out. But I am just going to show you what it means to figure out standard deviation by hand. And standard deviation is just another measure of how spread apart your numbers are. Just like range, just like interquartile range. Standard deviation is actually more specific than either one of those. And you really need to learn standard deviation just because it's going to come into play with what we're going to do in the next section with the normal curve. And I'm going to explain all that probably tomorrow. So standard deviation just explains how spread apart things are. Okay, so you would figure out standard deviation using this formula, and it's labeled in your calculator using sigma. So let me just show you back to if we were looking at those girls' test scores again. Let's look in L1. It goes the mean, which is the average. You don't have to know about that second one or the third one, but right here, that's sigma. And that stands for standard deviation. So right there, that's the standard deviation of the scores for Hannah's test. Okay, so 1.41. And the way that you figure out standard deviation, sigma, or standard deviation, is equal to, are you ready for this? The square root of the summation, meaning you're adding up together a bunch of terms, the summation from when I is equal to 1 all the way up until I is equal to n, meaning that it's going to change for depending on how many total number of things that you're calculating. And you're going to do x sub I, so x sub 1, x sub 2, x sub 3, all the way up to x sub n, minus x bar, which is the average, all squared, and then you're going to divide that by the total number of points that you have. Okay? So, be very thankful that you don't have to figure out what population standard deviation is by yourself, that the calculator does it for you, because look, it's right there. I could explain to you how to do this, but it's really not even worth it because you have way more important things that you need to worry about. All you need to know is standard deviation is a measure of spread, and it's right there in your calculator. Now, sample standard deviation. That's also in your calculator as well. I do know that there's a slight difference in how you figure out population standard deviation versus sample standard deviation. I think that the formula is changed just slightly. All that you need to know is that sample standard deviation is represented by an S in your calculator, which is right above it. So population standard deviation is right here. That's sigma. Sample starts with an S, so they label it with an S. That's sample standard deviation. And you see how the numbers are just different by just a little bit, by a tenth? Don't even ask me how they figured that out. I have no idea. But I do know that you only use sample, only use this when you only know a sample of the population. You're going to use this, that's when you use sample standard deviation. You use population standard deviation when you know the whole population. Okay? So, if a question is saying to use sample standard deviation, you use the S. If it just says find the standard deviation and it doesn't say sample or population, if they are just saying find the standard deviation, you use sigma. If it's saying find the sample standard deviation, you use the S. Okay? So that is all that I want to do today. I don't really think that you had any homework that was only on that stuff. This is the next homework assignment, number 107. That's page 495. I just want to see to make sure if you could do it or not at this point, or if you have to wait for me to go over the rest of the stuff. 495, 7, 8, and 10. And 502, 1, 6, and 10. You could probably do that homework. Yeah, you can do that homework right now. So if you want to do homework number 107, that would be just fine. Okay? And then I'm going to start up these videos again either tomorrow or the next day and try to finish off this chapter for you. Okay? So I will see you then.